they triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And so, like, literally with our testimonies, we defeat Satan. And tonight I have a real privilege of announcing the man who's going to give our testimony this year. It's Kent Gilge. And many of you know Kent Gilge. He's been a staple on the High Line for a long time. I officially found out today he moved to Chinook in 1979. So he's been here for 45 years, and I think he was in Wolf Point maybe for a couple years before that. But Kent has an amazing story, and I'm excited what God's going to say through him tonight. Me and him were catching up at McDonald's a couple months ago, and we were talking, and he shared with me some of what he's going to share tonight. And I was like, man, that is what I think guys need to hear. So I'm excited to have Kent come on up here. He was a Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Park fish biologist for a while. You might see him. He's also known as Fish Dude on his license plate. And he's raised all his kids, 4 boys and a daughter, here in Havre. And, they say that God isn't going to put you through more than what you can handle. And Kent's going to talk about some of that tonight. But when I first met Kent was right on the heels of his house being burnt to the ground with all his possessions in it in Chinook. And that's not what he's going to talk about tonight. But it kind of, I think, shows you the faith that Kent has. He's been through a lot, but God is faithful, and we're excited to hear what God's going to talk to us tonight through Kent. So please give him a warm welcome and give him your attention.
I don't know. Let's just start putting it here and see what happens. Oh, great. I want to make a public service announcement kind of before we start everything else. Let everybody know. It's kind of nice because I can get 300 people out of the way at one time instead of talking individually. And those of you who don't know, I am deafer than a rock. And I was born deaf in this ear, and I lost half my hearing in the other one from my younger years where I thought I was invincible, and I fired 1 million rifles and guns without ear protection. So let that be a lesson to you. And so anyway, if you want to talk to me, you have to get on this side. You'll see me turning all the time. But anyway, I just think we should really thank all these guys that put this together. This is amazing. Let's give them a hand. It wasn't me. So what I really wanted to talk about tonight, and so you guys have been having a good time here tonight? Has it been good? Good. Well, I'll see if I can put a damper on that then, and you'll see why. What I wanted to talk about, and I was asked to share, was what God did in my life through my son's death here. His anniversary of his death is next week, and it'd be 2 years now. And prior to that, I lost a daughter about a little over 3 years ago, my youngest daughter. And so it's been, and so if you're talking to me and I kind of glaze out, it could be one of two things. I'm deaf and I'm not hearing you, or it's just grief. I get waves of grief, and they just come in, and it just kind of takes you over. And so I want to talk a little bit about grief, because there isn't anybody here who is unfamiliar with grief. And by the way, I might not be listening to you just because I don't want to either. That's the other thing. But grief is a funny thing. But I learned that for my wife and I and my sons, I should let you know I have three more sons who are the jewels in my crown. You know, I mean, they're just amazing. And but you know, grief comes in. I don't. It's hard to really describe. You know, it comes in like, and maybe you can describe it better. But I feel like it's almost like ocean waves that pummel you, and you're not ready for it, and your heart starts going 1,000 miles a minute, or it stops, and then it goes, but it comes back. It's always there. And if it wasn't for those times of respite that God gives us, I don't know where I'd be. I really don't know where I'd be. But it's, I learned that, you know, when you've grieved for several years, you know, there's something in the back of your mind that's kind of like, this isn't right. You know, this should be over this by now. And I've learned, number one, you don't get over it. Number two, you just learn to go with the waves. And, but my understanding of the grief was that the reason you have such intense grief is just because of the amount of love that you had for that person. And the more you love them, the more you grieve. And it's not a bad thing. It's just there. And that's what it's all about. And I think there's a purpose to it, and kind of working through that. And so anyway, you know, just kind of be aware of that. But what I wanted to share today was the story of my oldest son, Kirby's, the last few years of his life, and what God did. And I need to share this because it's so encouraging for me. I have to remember this, and so I have to tell it. And can everybody hear me okay? I don't know if we're okay? Okay, I don't know if I'm too close or too far. And this can take hours, I mean, to tell, but I'm going to do the Cliff's Notes version and try to hit the high points. And I pray that it's encouraging for you. But bottom line is, my son got married young. He was married when he was 18. But he was about as mature as anybody I've seen at that age, and an exemplary kid. He ended up having 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls. And yeah, somewhere after the last child and that, things started going south in his marriage. And he never really explained to me what that was all about, you know, and I didn't press him. But anyway, because of it, he started having really hard time. And like a lot of us, we figure out, okay, if I can't fix it, then what do I do? And so he decided to self-medicate himself with alcohol. And he lived a long ways away from us. He lived in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and then they moved to California for a number of years. So I didn't get to see him much. And didn't, you know, even talking on the phone, not much happened. It was just the what. But then pretty soon things started happening when we started seeing. I noticed he was drinking, and I was concerned, but as a father, you want to think the best of your kids. And so I was just like, okay, he's having trouble. You know, he's had some drinks, he's self-medicated, he's trying to get over this. And we talked about it, but it wasn't a big deal. But then all of a sudden, years later, it became evident that he couldn't keep a job, and it was always excuses. It was always somebody else's fault, you know. And then it got to the point where his wife finally says, "You can't live here." She kicked him out of the house. And so he lived in his car for over a year. until he ran into a friend who invited him to go stay on his couch at his grandmother's house, and he ended up living there for a number of years. And it was really sad, and I could see him deteriorating. And though when I was with him or when I talked to him, it was just terrible. He was estranged from his wife, estranged from his kids, and so, I was trying to think of what can we do? What can we do? And then every time I'd see him, the next time I'd see him in worse shape, until he got to the point where it was like, we could find him dead in his car tomorrow. That's how bad it was. And so for over a year to 2 years, I just pleaded with him constantly to, come on home. You got nothing there. Your wife won't let you in. The kids don't want to see you. You've alienated yourself from everybody. And so just come on home. We'll get you fixed up and get you back on your feet again and stuff. And so we had a million conversations like that. And there was always excuses, always one thing after another. It was always, I got doctor appointments. They think I have this. They think I have that. I got to go in for a CAT scan. I got a job opportunity. I got this. I got that. It was all lies. And you realize after a while that it's so incredibly easy for an alcoholic to lie because they're believing lies themselves. And it was just what it reminded me of, and a lot of you can probably, or some of you anyway, can probably relate to this. If you've had alcohol issues, if you're an alcoholic, if you're a recovering alcoholic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, but in his case, it reminded me of, you've all seen probably The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Well, every time you thought you were making some headway, it was like he pulled that ring out, and it was like, my precious, my precious. The alcohol gets a hold of you, and that's all there is in the world. That's all there is in the world, and you have to have it, and you have to have it to survive, and you believe you're going to die if you don't have it. So anyway, it went on, and just pleading with him, and I'm trying to think of what to do. It got to the point where I even talked to the boys, and I said, let's just go kidnap him. Let's go tie him up and bring him home. And I said, well, I'm an old fart. I'm not moving like I was, but he's in such bad shape. I think I can take him, And so we'll just do that. Well, I was pretty close to doing that. And then I realized you can't make somebody come out of addiction. If they don't want to, you can't make somebody do that. And especially as ingrained as he was with that, he was not going to be where he couldn't get his hands on alcohol. And so that went by the wayside. So then we thought, well, eventually, if he doesn't die in the meantime, we've got to be ready for him to come home and detox and rehab. And so the wife and I, we started going to AA meetings. We talked to every alcoholic we could find, tried to find out some information because this was all pretty new to me. And then people were saying, well, if he comes home, where are you going to take him to detox? And I said, well, we'll do it at home. And he goes, no. He said, one thing I didn't realize, he said, people coming off of alcohol have a far more likely chance of dying during that detox than even opium or heroin addicts and stuff. And anyway, this went on. So you look back at me, and I'm a wreck. I'm just, for a year or more, I've been talking with him, trying to get him home. And I can't think of anything. So I have this routine. I don't know if you're a routine person, but I am, more so in my later years. And I get up in the morning, usually around daybreak or a little before. You make a pot of coffee. I get my cup of coffee. And then I go in the kitchen window, and I have this big field out back of my house. And so I just stare at the field and look for animals and things like that. But that's where I do my talking with God. And that's where I do my praying. And so, I just was wringing my hands, and I would get up every morning. This is for almost a year. I'd get up every morning. The first thing that would hit me was Kirby beyond my mind and his situation. And my gut would tighten up in a knot, and sometimes I'd throw up. I was so whatever. I was beyond myself. Nothing was working, couldn't figure out. It was obvious he was not going to budge, and we couldn't go get him. And I'll tell you, as a father, it's devastating. So I got my cup of coffee, and I'm sitting at the window where I talk with God, I pray with God, and I rail at him a lot at that place. And he just takes it. And so one morning I got up, and I was just talking with God about Kirby again and worrying. And out of the blue, God started talking to me. And he said, crazy question. He says, how many times have you worried about something in your life? And I thought, I don't know, 1,000, 10,000? I don't know, but I know I've worried a lot over my life. And he said, well, you need to know, you need to understand that worrying is exactly 180 degrees from faith. It's the opposite of faith. And he said, I've called you to be a man of faith. And I was like, yeah, I understand, that makes sense. And then he said something that just blew me away. He said, I love Kirby more than you do. And I cannot tell you what that did to me. That should have been the greatest words I ever heard. I was pissed. Because I didn't think anybody could love Kirby any more than me. And it just set me back. And then I sat back, and then I said, yes, Lord, yeah, I know that. And then he said, if you will turn this over to me, and you will have faith, and you will have trust, I got this. And I thought those were the greatest words I ever heard in my life, because I was at the end of my rope. I could not go any farther. I had nothing to contribute to saving my son. And all I was thinking about was how I could do something. What can I do? What can I do? Who can I get to do something? I did not prostrate myself or go before God in confidence and in faith. And so I told him, I said, I got nothing. I got to trust you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe this. So for the next few days, I'd get up in the morning, go through my routine. I'd get my cup of coffee. On the way up, my stomach was in a knot, and I was worrying again. And then I caught it, and I said, oh, I'm worrying. I don't have to worry. And so, that went away. Next day, same thing. I'd start to worry, and I'd go, no, I'm going to believe. I have to believe. I have to trust. And it would go away. And I think after a few days, I realized that this was probably maybe the first time in my whole life that I had exhibited true faith. I always thought I had faith, but it wasn't until then. And the reason I kind of knew that is because about day 5, when I thought about what God was going to do, I started chuckling. As I was walking around, I started chuckling about what's God going to do. And I think it was on day 6 or day 7, the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Kurt. And he says, come get me, I'm coming home. And we were just unbelievable. So wife and I drove over, we got his car, we drove him home. He was in such bad shape, we weren't even sure he was going to make it home. And he agreed when we got home. He said, yes, we're going to go through a detox here and stuff, and we're going to do it at home. And people had warned us about doing it at home. because of the incidents of fatalities with that. And I just would answer them in faith, and I just said, God didn't bring him home to kill him. He didn't bring him home so he could die here. And he's got something planned. And so we went through a week of the most horrendous stuff you can imagine. I mean, you do not want to go through a detox with anybody. And it was just 24 hours around the clock. And all the DTs and all the throwing up and all the everything else that goes on. And by the end of the week, he had calmed down, and things were writing in his body. And by the end of the month, he looked like his high school graduation picture. He looked great. And so I got all excited, and I was just like, okay, Curb, we got you on the right track here, and my plans are, we're going to get you going here, and then we'll get you a job, we'll get you your own apartment, and you can start working on rebuilding this relationship with your family, with your wife and your kids. And I had this whole plan planned out, and where he was going to go, what he was going to do. And he began doing that, and he told me, he says, this is what I want. This is all I want, is to restore my relationship with my family. And he did, and he sat down, and he really got the town on doing it. And it wasn't easy because of what he'd done to his family. You can imagine. It wasn't easy for them to accept him. And it took years of him working on that to break through. And in the process of it, over those years, he ended up staying with us he was staying in Havre for probably 5 years or so. And we got him after about a year, we got him his own apartment, and I thought that would be good for him and that, but that was a mistake because Curb's just if you know Kirby, he's just the most sociable guy in the world. And for him to be alone in an apartment was not a good thing. But then he started believing the lies that all alcoholics go through, which is, I'm not in the same situation I was before. I'm away from that situation, so that's not a trigger or anything else. I'm feeling good. My body's good. Everybody else is social drinking. Why can't I social drink, And that's an absolute no-no for you that know that. There's no social drinking as an alcoholic. And so he fell big time, got back up, got sobered up again, went through several events of just falling and getting back up again. But through this whole time period, it was pretty amazing. His attitude was just, he just loves people, and he loved nothing more than doing things for people and making them laugh and making their day. And I heard 100 times what he would say, whether he was in a good state or a bad state, he always said, God's plan is perfect. That was one of his favorite sayings. God's plan is perfect. And I agreed with him, except when we were picking him up from a fall, and he'd say that, and I would look at him and say, well, then why the heck won't you get with the plan? I mean, if God's plan is, why don't you become part of it, And he would just smile. And he just knew something. He knew about this plan that God had. And he just continued to talk to his family and try to restore that relationship again. And then, I don't know, about 3 years or so into it, he started having some real physical issues in that. And he had a gallbladder that had almost killed him. It was in a terrible shape. And then when they got that done and they started doing some tests, they started looking at him, and they found that he had absolutely destroyed just about everything in his body during that time of drinking. You couldn't name an organ, you couldn't name, his bones weren't even producing red blood cells anymore. It was just a very, very debilitating situation. And so he had all sorts of surgeries. They determined he had cirrhosis of the liver, really bad, and we did all sorts of things. We went through getting him on a list for a liver transplant. We actually went to Seattle, but his test results were actually improving, and so they said, "No, we're not going to put you on the list right now." And I remember Curb saying, "My test results all seem to be improving, and yet I know I'm dying. I'm dying." And he actually longed for death, but he did not want to go until he had resolved the situation with his family. Well, things got better and better with his family all the time, and he would talk with his wife, and I don't know how many times he said, "This is the best conversation I had in 20 years with my wife." And he says, "We just have not been able to do it, and now that things are clear." And his kids, they would call him all the time about, girlfriends or boyfriends or jobs, and ask for advice about certain things, and he had quite a bit of wisdom to give them, and so things were really, really picking up, really looking good, and he would also. He was always trying to encourage people, and so he was so sick. I mean, he just had a recliner in a bedroom that we had with all the stuff that he needed, and we were taking trips to the doctor over a year, probably 2-3 times a week, and either to the hospital or doctors. So it was like a hospice there is what it was, and he was so tired he could barely walk from his room to his bathroom and stuff, and so he was really, really down, and everything was shutting down in his body, and he knew it, but every day it was always, God's plan is perfect. God's plan is perfect, and he used to drive me nuts, and he would go down his contact list on his phone, and he would just call up hundreds of people, probably in a week, and chat with them and encourage them, and just how are things going and everything else. Or people would call him. His phone was ringing all the time, and I would see him laying in there with his head back, his mouth open, ashen. Sometimes I'd have to go take his pulse, see if he was still alive. And yet the phone would ring, and he'd answer the phone, and he would come out of it, and he would talk for half an hour encouraging people. And then he'd put it back down, and it was and I'd run into people on the street, and they'd say, "Hey, I talked to Curb the other day, and man, he sounds really good. How's he doing?" And I said, "Oh, if you only knew. If you only knew what he'd come out of an oxygen tent to talk to you and tell you a joke or encourage you, And so it came time for his oldest son wanted to introduce his fiancée to him, and asked if he could come on over, and said sure. So he came over with her, and we had an evening, and it was great. It was just a great time to see the kids responding like that, and him loving on them, and he excused himself to go down to the bathroom in the basement, and I didn't know that. And then all of a sudden I get a text, and he says, "Can you bring a towel downstairs?" And I'm like, "I didn't even know you were gone." So I got a towel and went down there. And he was throwing up, and because of all the things that he had wrong with him, one of the things was his stomach and the veins in his esophagus and everything were extremely fragile, and they were really careful about that. And he went downstairs, and he was throwing up, and the force of it burst one of those veins in his esophagus, a major vein. And when I got down there, it was nothing but blood everywhere. And all he said, I brought the towel down, and typical Curb, thinking about others, he said, "I wanted to get this cleaned up before the girls saw it." That's what he was thinking about. And I'm like, you are bleeding to death. Get in the car. You know, that's it. We're running to the hospital right now. What's the matter with you? We got him in there, and he, of course, they went into the ER, and we had to go outside, and then, you know, then they came out and asked me the stupidest question in the world: do you want to see your son? And I was like, yeah. So I went in there, and he was leaning over, throwing up into a bag copious amounts of blood, and they had IVs and were giving him blood, trying to put in as much blood as they could. And typical curve, just to give you an idea, if you don't know him, you should have known him. But he was leaning over on his side, and then they laid him back down, and he looked up at this cute little nurse that was there, and he said, "Can I have some ice chips? I'm so dry. My mouth is so dry." And she says, "No, we can't give you anything in the situation you're in." And he just paused, and he looked up at her, and he said, "When I first came in, I thought we had a thing, but I don't really like you now." And I was like, are you kidding me? Do you know the situation that you're in right now, you know? And he did. He had absolutely no fear of death. We talked about death a lot because it was every day it was maybe going to be there. But he had no fear of death. He welcomed it. I'm sure in my mind he longed for that. And he wanted to get things straight with his family, and then he was ready to go home. And anyway, they flew him. They had to fly him to Great Falls, so they couldn't do anything there. We drove down there. On the way down there, he went into a coma and never recovered. And so we spent the day and a half in the hospital in the ICU in Great Falls, called the kids. All the kids rushed over from Idaho. And they got to spend a whole day and just talking to him. And I said, "Hey, you know, we don't know about people in comas. You hear all the time that they hear everything. And though there's not much going on in his body right now, anything you want to say to your dad, go in there and talk to him." So they all took turns going in and visiting with him and stuff. And the girls sang songs, and they crawled into bed with him and hugged him. And it was crazy. And the cool thing is, God provided a Christian doctor and a Christian nurse, and they were so helpful. And they said after a period of time, they said, "You know that he's dead. Really, we're just keeping him alive here. There's nothing there." And I said, "Yeah, I know that." But I said, listen to this in this room. And those girls were singing, and they're just praising him and thanking him and doing everything they could. And I said, "I know that, and I know the time is coming here, but not now, not until that's over with." And everybody got a chance to say what they wanted to. And it was real interesting because his youngest daughter, Myra, we noticed when she was talking with him that you could see the monitor going whenever she would say something, you know. And I said, "Myra, keep talking, you know." But the time came where we had to say our goodbyes, and he fell asleep. And he went home. And so I'm missing so much here. I wish I could fill in all of the things, but I didn't want to miss, in conclusion, the points that I was trying to make. That it's like, how can this be encouraging? You know, I mean, how can this be an encouraging lesson? Well, it's encouraging because of the lessons that I learned. Some of the most important lessons of my whole life. And so here's what I wanted to say about the lessons I learned. It's like, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, you have to know this. God is not mad at you. He's mad about you. He loves you. He's mad about you. He's not mad at you. Some people go around their whole life trying to push God away because they think he's angry with them. He's not. He loves you, no matter what you've done. Number two, God desires to speak to you much more than you desire to listen. And this is the lesson for me. it's critical that you get on board with his plan by getting quiet, asking him for direction, and then listening. And why is that? It's because we are corrupted people stumbling around with our own plans and solutions. Most of our thoughts sound pretty good to us, don't they? I mean, when you think of something, it sounds pretty smart, doesn't it? However, I remember Isaiah shared these words from God to the people of Israel. God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. And so we can't trust really what we're thinking, at least the first thought we're thinking usually, unless you're walking in the Spirit every minute of the day. Number 3, God only wants us to humble ourselves before him and to realize that in our own strength, we will make a mess of things. He wants us to trust and seek him in everything we think, say, and do. And an even better scripture to remember is Jesus' words in the Gospel of John, where he said, apart from me, you can do nothing. Nothing. As Paul said in his letter in the Romans, if God be for us, who can stand against us? Do we think of that when our back is up against the wall? I usually don't. That's not the first place I normally go. Faith in God is essential for salvation as well as growth and fruitfulness. And I am the most prideful, arrogant person, I think, on the face of the earth. And the reason I say that is because there's nothing more prideful than thinking, I have it within me to fix this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go there. I'm going to do this. That's absolute arrogance when we're supposed to be looking to him and laying it all down. And so I hope this was encouraging. I thank you for letting me share it because I have to do it all the time, or that grief sometimes will just overcome me. And I thank you all for the opportunity. So thank you.